Hi everyone, Magnus here, back today with a recap of the Speed Chess Championships quarterfinals that just happened between Fabiano Caruana and Alireza Firouzja. It was very back and forth. I'm going to be giving you like the recap of kind of what happened, like the patterns of back and forth, as well as three games that I've selected, which I think were very nice. So starting off with an earlier game, it was quite back and forth in the 5+1 section. If I haven't explained already, which I haven't, they play three different formats. They play 5+1 game, 3+1 game, and as you can see, a 3+1 game here, as well as a bullet game. So, and bullet being 1+1. And starting off in the 5-minute portion, in the first few games, it was very back and forth. Alireza, I believe, got 2 wins, and then Fabiano got 2 wins. So it was very balanced. They started off with a draw, and I'm going to be showing one of the wins that Fabi got in game number 4. So it started off with the English, which is something that Fabi was playing very consistently throughout the match until he switched it up later, which I'll be showing in game number 3, which was complete chaos and just a beautiful back and forth game between the two of them. So be sure to stay for game number 3. Anyway, pawn to c4, we get g6, knight c3, and Firouzja goes for this pretty cagey setup, not going for standard d6 if you're trying to play like King's Indian kind of setup, but instead he goes for this e6 and d5 push, taking some space in the center. Nothing too much to talk about here just yet. Both sides developing normally. A little bit of a non-standard developing move here with knight to c6. Generally, you want your pawn in front of the knight, but I guess it makes sense given that he might want to fianchetto, or if there is a trade, this bishop is now opened up to these squares. So we do see bishop to g4, some trades happen, and we're getting a lot of trades. Keep in mind that Fabi has just come out of 2 losses, so he might just be looking to try and stop the bleeding and make a draw. And we continue to get some maneuvering around, Fabi dancing with the horse, offering a trade with the knight going to d3, and also saying if you don't take me I might go into c5 or e5 and be quite a menace. But of course, Firouzja snaps that horse, gobble gobble, and after queen takes d3, we've now got knight versus bishop. This knight on d6 is a lovely piece, and maybe it can be, so you can support e4 with like f5 or something. And this bishop, while it is unopposed and is like the classic Reti kind of King's Indian bishop, whatever you want to call it, and maybe if you can get some pawns moving and chip away, eventually this bishop will be a great piece. That is still a long time to be seen. We get a4, rook comes to the c file. I don't really know why he wasn't going for this expansion over here. Maybe he wants rook c5. But anyway, bishop to f3 played. Maybe the bishop's better on e2. King can come to g2 as well. And maybe the rook can come over and support some expansion over here. And a king comes up to g2. We see a trade. And now both sides are doing well in this equal position. As you can see, the knight remaneuvers to e2, where it can potentially go to d3 and try and act against this knight's forward momentum. Firouzja does play the move f5 that I was speaking about earlier. Bishop comes to d3. And basically the players are just shuffling around here, moving about. And the knight does, in fact, jump into, as Hikaru would say, the bastion on e4, where basically if the bishop would like to take that knight, he's saying, I want to get connect 4, and then I'm just going to leave the board and claim a win, because connect 4 wins the game, as we all know. So rook goes to a3, doesn't want to give Firouzja connect 4 because then Fabi would just have to resign. Knight goes back to d6, maybe saying that there's no more connect 4 for you. And after all these trades, basically some more moving about. Now there is this split structure after that exchange. So Fabi now is a little bit better, and if he can start mobilizing on this side and create two weaknesses, that is one of the principles. I'm sorry for doing that to you guys. I meant two weaknesses. Let's have peace here. And rook to c1, Fabi now poking on this side of the board, potentially looking to play on this side as well. And he's kind of just stretching Firouzja apart, showing the dominance of the bishop, keeping an eye on this side and also guarding pawns on this side. Rooks can easily swing over to the b file. More expansion. Rook comes to the b file. a6, lovely move. Now looking for rook b6 to create more weaknesses and fork some pawns up. Rook comes to b6, collects the pawn, and bishop to b3 consolidates. Bishop to b3 also has potential threats here, with the king being on the 6th rank. As you can see, Firouzja leaps his knight back into the bastion, but just as soon as it entered that nice little e4 hole, Fabi snaps the pawn and forces Firouzja to resign. As this pawn is falling, this horse is loose, with this rook pressuring, and this king is stuck, most importantly pinned by the rook. So as you can see, it was definitely back and forth early on, but things started to get a little bit out of hand. Firouzja, after what you would expect, potentially the old Firouzja might get a little bit tilted, frustrated. This new Firouzja was definitely on the ball, didn't let these two losses get to his head, and instead, this is back in the 5+1 portion, only a couple games later. Firouzja has been racking up a nice advantage out of the gate. I think he won 2 games in a row before this one, or maybe won just 1 game. But anyway, Caruana back with his trusty English opening. Firouzja playing, striking in the center with the 2 horses. Classic stuff here. We get some exchanges, and this move queen to c2. Now the knights cannot jump into b4, so it makes sense to have this queen potentially on c2. In the future, this c pawn can come under some pressure, and the queen is often good, having removed itself from the d file so that a rook can get there. So anyway, we see some exchanges. Fabi going for his g3 stuff, g3, d3, and basically Fabi's arguing that I'm going to move this knight to d2 in the future. I'm going to control this e5 push, and maybe in the future I'm going to put my rook on b1, play moves like queen a4, and put some pressure on you. So knight does go to d2, in fact, and the rook does go to b1, eyeing the b7 pawn, saying you want to play rook b8, go for it. If you play b6, maybe I'll go queen a4, and I will kill that horse. So anyway, rook to b8 and queen a4, another great move here. Point being that if you just do something random, we might see the move rook takes b7, which would be a fantastic move. And if the rook were to take, bishop takes c6, and you are getting skewered, you are getting forked, you are getting porked, whatever you want to call it, it's nasty business. The rook would drop and you would lose the game. Of course, Firouzja doesn't miss this. He instead goes for bishop h3, a great move. Now this idea doesn't work of rook takes, because you can simply take the bish and there is absolutely nothing there. Sorry about that. Anyway, instead we do see castles rather than moving the bishop up, something like bishop f3. The reasoning being that there actually would be this really nice shot, knight to d4. And the point is that after the queen would take, given the brilliant move there, after queen takes, you have knight takes f3, knight takes, and the bishop can come back to d7, and you are positionally dominating, with the white having lost their prized possession, their g2 bishop, and black simply has the bishop pair with an advantage, space advantage in the center, and everything's going black's way. But Fabi castles, we get an exchange here. a6 and b5, kicking out the queen, booting the lady. We do get queen to b3, potentially eyeing some tactics over here. But the bishop goes back to f8. Nice defensive move, potentially looking for g6, bishop g7 in the future. Bishop goes out to e3 and knight to a5, kicking the queen a little bit further back. Queen goes to c2. saying that, guess what, you can't take my a3 pawn because then I will skewer you and you will have a bad time. Apparently there is pawn to b4 here, and things are getting a little bit crazy. I don't really know what to make of this position, but it doesn't look good for black. Anyway, instead, after queen to c2, we do get pawn f5. Firouzja on fire, going for the offensive here, flinging f-pawn, Freddy down the board. Knight goes to g5, and now Caruana is setting up some nasty business. But after pawn to h6, queen to a2, no longer very venomous, because this knight check can be met with king to h7 rather than king to g8. So f5, h6, good moves, kicking the horsey back. Now the pawn breaks into e5, splitting up Fabi's structure. And after a capture in the center, the rook takes, very nice, not getting distracted by this move, which could be met by knight d2, and immediately your pawn is under pressure. So the rook takes in the center. Fabi tries to strike back by killing off Andy here. But Firouzja not interested, saying, I'm not going to take your pawn today because then I would hang a rook. And equally, I'm not going to take your pawn with my rook, probably out of concern of this queen sacrifice, losing this rook, losing the queen for the two rooks, but possibly an interesting exchange. Anyway, what happens? Knight gets driven into c4 and bishop to d4. Big blunder by Fabi. Missing this move, possibly pawn to c5, and the point is that the bishop is trapped by a disgusting tactic. Pawn to c5, and the bishop can't even go back to e3 where it wanted to be because there's rook takes e3. Beautiful move here, exploiting the fact that the queen and the king are on a forkable square, and you will lose the queen if you were to try and not be down a piece. So after c5, the bishop is in fact trapped, and we see a capture, capture, and capture. From here, Firouzja nicely plants his queen in the center, eyeing the king down this diagonal, brings his rooks in, e3 and g5. Point being, he just wants to smash these pawns, beat Fabiano over the head, and just come in with his pawns. Admittedly, things started getting a little bit complicated here with the move queen to b1, going after this b pawn, but it was nicely protected via a push and the long-range sniper sitting on f8, hiding out, saying, I'm going to do my business from afar. Queen goes to d3. Basically, Caruana is just shuffling a little bit. Knight goes to a4, kicking the rook. b3 can now come. Also, the knight can come to c6, going after this pawn with the knight and potentially the bishop. Rook moves over, bishop comes in, and once this pawn collapses, the entire white position is going to fall apart with rooks coming in. For example, if you were to take here, there's just rook takes, which is what happened in the game, and you are getting smashed down the d file. Let's say you would, I don't even know, move queen c2. You can simply exchange a bunch of pieces here. Engine even suggesting this absolute killer move, pawn to b3, and after something like queen to b1, you can just move back. b2 is coming, and you are going to win the game, removing the queen or something. So I don't even know what white's meant to play. Let's say h4. You can play b2. I don't even know, moving this queen here. Something like this. Queens get traded off. And you will simply, yeah, exactly like that. Rook b4 and rook to c1, just as planned. And you will get this pawn to promote and win the game. So, but now this is the final game in the blitz, a 3-minute blitz that I would like to show you. At this point, the game was completely spiraling out of control for Fabi. I think he had like a 4 or even 5 point deficit, and things were looking pretty bad for him. However, he did switch up his openings from c4. He was having not very good success with the pawn going to c4, and instead he switched up to d4, going for a Ninzo Indian defense. And after a3 takes, we get one of the most complicated positions you can get. Pawns often come out to c5. We get b6. Black tries to win this bishop, win this pawn with a bunch of weird maneuvering on the queen side. Meanwhile, white starts a huge attack, claims the big center, and launches the pawns after the king. So let's see. Bishop comes out, f3, c5, e4, and basically this is exactly what I said. White gets the huge center. Black's going to get play against this c4 pawn. Black does play knight c6, and knight to h3 gets played. If you were to capture in the center, we would see something like this, and pawn to e5 would get played. The knight would be kicked out to the shadow realm, and there would be bishop takes h7, and you would lose your horse in the center. For that reason, Firouzja does not bother with trying to win the seemingly free pawn, and instead just retreats his knight to the back, saying maybe I'm going to do some more weird dancing with the horses and try to take your c-pawn. Fabi simply plays bishop to e3, good developing stuff. Castles, knight a4, and queen e2, guarding the pawn. Knight d6 could get played, which would be definitely an interesting move, but then Fabi, as you can see later in the game, we do get something similar, and he does just sack the pawn, saying, congratulations, you have now stepped into the eternal pin. Anyway, instead, Firouzja plays rook c8, keeping something nice and non-committal. Pawn gets shoved down the d5 here, closing the center. When you want to attack, it's good to close the center. And pawn comes to f4. Fabi has let everything loose and is going full steam ahead, sending the pawns down the line, and things do look very scary for Firouzja here. Engine, of course, sitting smugly, saying 0.00 or 0.02. Instead, knight comes to d6. Firouzja can't really see what else to do other than try and go for this pawn. Apparently your best move is this completely ugly transformation of the position, which honestly just looks horrible. When this is your best option, I think it's already quite problematic. Anyway, we get knight d6 and e5, and Fabi says, go take that c-pawn, choke on it, I'm going to come for the king, and he's coming for the king, and he's not going to miss, or so it would seem. Knight takes on c4, we get a calm move, bishop to f2, saying, I'm going to get out of the way, and honestly, I think you're about to get paralyzed. So f5 played, stopping any funny business with some like sacrifices, queen h5, and coming in for the king. Or potentially after just this exchange, this could be very weak as well. So anyway, Firouzja shuts it down. We get pawn to d6, and we have got connect 3. Fabi very close to making the infamous connect 5 and winning the game. Potentially that was his big mistake this game, not claiming connect 5. But after queen to e8, blundering connect 5 here, Fabi decides not to go for it, and apparently there is the move bishop to h4, which was very good. I don't know if he played for it. No, he went for a5. But the idea is that bishop to h4, you could get into e7 and do some nasty stuff. But a4 is also a nice move, stopping b5, which could be potentially the only way to try and get out of this forever pin. So a4, very good stuff, and the knight goes into g5, but there is now h6, and maybe after knight to f3, queen could come in, and maybe it's holdable for black. Bishop goes to b7 though, a really nice move, temporarily sacrificing this knight over here, in view of the fact that after h3, if you were to move the knight back, there would be bishop takes f3, and all of a sudden, the turns have tabled, and you are getting smashed down the Gary file. Anyway, Fabi comes up with this nice move, pawn to h4, reinforcing the horsey, so that now if you go for something like h6, there's even h5, and if you then move your queen back, all of a sudden, knight goes back to h3 or to f3, and there is no more queenie on the g-file to exploit this pin with the bishop and the checkmate. So anyway, h4 is a great move. Bishop d5, h5, kicking the queen back. And I do believe that here the commentators were saying that moves like king to h2, rook g1, and g4 should be played. But Fabi rushes in there, wants to strangle Firouzja and get back a little bit of revenge. So he lashes out with the move pawn to g4, but a timely h6 kicks the horse back, takes on g4, cold-blooded. Now we enter a time scramble, 26 seconds apiece pretty much. Queen comes into g4, and things do look sketchy for black, but at the same time, things could also switch up very quickly with this rook pressuring on this file. The queen can enter and is also pressuring this pawn, and the monster bishop here, the light squared bishop, is a killer. Also, forgot about this, knight is now sneaking into d2 and to f3, and guess what? White is borderline getting checkmated if you don't do anything. Let's say you play rook to a3, a very inspiring move. If you would get hit with pawn to f3, and after the king moves, boom, you lose the queen. Anyway, knight d2, bishop h4 gets played, having to sacrifice the rook here. If you don't, you're getting smacked with knight f3. So the rook is in fact sacrificed, and this beautiful move, rook to f5, potentially you could go for something like bishop g6 in this position, and apparently the best move there would have been knight to e3, hitting the queen. Absolute chaos, because the queen's borderline trapped. If rook f7, we could get a position like this, and that would have been absolutely crazy. Knight jumping in, pawns coming in, there's a pin here, queen to f8 maybe, I don't even know. Either way, rook takes, rook f5, brilliant defensive move here. After the bishop takes, the pawn takes, and now the queen is consolidating along with the bishop and the rooks, and black is simply doing much, much better, especially after this move, queen to e2, simply blundering bishop c4 with another skewer, and another exchange is gone. And after king takes on f1, Fabiano simply resigns the game in a very discouraged way. This was his pretty much big chance to get back into the game. I believe it was only a 3-point or so deficit. He could have really closed things down to a 2-point deficit entering the bullet, but instead that gap simply widened. And the bullet was a little bit closer. Fabi was striking back at times, although that might just be because Firouzja sort of had put on the brakes, maybe relaxed a little bit too much, knowing that he'd already booked his ticket to Paris, coming in the... Is it Paris? I actually don't know. France. So it's somewhere in France. But he's definitely made it to the semi-finals, I think, which will be played live coming next September. So if you guys did enjoy this video and find it entertaining or interesting, please do consider liking and subscribing. That would very much help me out. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.